Alright, so we're going to start stripping the finish off this table. So we're going to put a nice thick layer of this clean stripper in here and let that sit for about 15 minutes and then kind of see what we can scrape off. So just using, like I said, the clean stripper, metal bucket, and just like a cheapy chip brush, you know, dollar brush, just something disposable. We're just going to toss it in there. So let's get going on that. This stuff's got a pretty strong odor, so they recommend use it in like a nice well ventilated area, or you can use like a mask. I got the garage closed right now, but I'll open it up once I'm done. So I got my son mowing the lawn, so I don't need to hear that right now. So, but once I'm done, I'll open this up and let it air out so I don't pass out here. So nobody needs to see that on camera. So there's at least a couple coats of polyurethane on this table, and obviously some stain. So I'm not sure how much this is going to take off in one shot. So we may have to do another coat on it. But we'll have to kind of see how it goes after this and then go from there. Alright, looks good. Make sure we didn't miss any spots. Looks like it's starting to kind of give like a hazy look, which is I think when it starts working. So that looks pretty good. So we'll kind of let that sit and come back in about 15 minutes. See what it looks like. Alright, so it's been about 15 minutes and this is kind of what we got now. You can see it's still starting to peel. Looks like maybe the clear coat. So I'm going to give it maybe 5-10 more minutes here and see where we're at with that. If we don't have too much more progress, I'll just start scraping, and then I may have to just keep hitting it with more layers of the paint stripper. So that's kind of what it looks like. You kind of see it bubbling up there. So we'll see if we can get some more area peeling up, and we'll go at it. Alright, we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Alright, we got the garage nice and aired out. Let's see what we got here. Just using a plastic scraper. Just kind of go slow here on the bubbled up areas. Looking pretty good. Looks like we got most of the polyurethane there. Maybe a little bit of stain, not a lot. I'll go over this whole table and then lay down another layer of the stripper. Alright, so not a ton of progress on that. It definitely needs more than one layer, or more than one layer of that stripper. So we'll put another layer on now and then let it sit for a while. See how that goes. Alright, so we got the top of the tabletop all stripped down. Just little bits here and there that'll be taken away when we sand it down. But for now, all the polyurethane's off and it's looking pretty good. So we'll flip it over and do the underside and then it'll be ready for sanding. So let's get on to that. Alright, so we flipped the table over and the underside isn't really worth stripping. There's not, I don't even know if there's any polyurethane on the bottom. So I'm going to put the sander on it, see how that looks, and go from there. So we'll sand the bottom first, and then we'll, if that goes good, we'll flip it over to the top and work on that and get this ready for a new coat of stain. So let's get started on that. something smells burning, and it's not. It's like oscillating really slow, but it's spinning, but any pressure you put on it just stops. So I got a new one in the cabinet, and we'll take apart this one later and see kind of what's going on with it. But just to keep moving, we'll get the other one and get moving here. Alright, so I bought this one some time ago when my other one, the pad had worn down so much that the sandpaper wouldn't stick to it. So I ended up going out and went and bought this one, the DeWalt D2645 1K. It's a 5-inch kit, palm sander kit. But then I ended up finding the pad online on Amazon or something. So I bought the new pad for the other one, the Ryobi, that just sounds like it just died. So I never ended up opening this. So we'll give it a shot. Looks pretty good, so we'll see how it does. So let's get sanding. So this sander's working out pretty good. The only issue I have really with it is the hose just kind of pressure fits in here, and it's been kind of popping out on me every once in a while, but I'll take some time later and kind of come up with a little more permanent solution to it than holding it in here. But otherwise it's great. It's working out perfect. Less vibration than the Ryobi had. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same. The handle's kind of the same, so it's got the same ergonomics as the Ryobi. But I feel less vibration. Maybe it's just because the other one was like 10 years old, at least 10 years old. So, but we'll kind of do the other half, and then we can flip it over and do the top. Alright, so that's the 80 grit on the underside, and we'll go through all the grits up to 220 on both sides. But we'll flip this over and do the 80 grit on that side. This a little harder than I thought it was going to be, but I think there was a coat, at least one coat of sealer on this side. The top side has everything stripped off except for the stain, so hopefully that'll go a little easier. So we'll flip this over and get started on that. So that went a lot faster than the underside since we used the chemical stripper on here. So looks good, came out really nice, and that's with the 80 grit. So we'll, like I said, go through all the other grits up to 220, and then we should be ready for stain. I gotta I gotta do the paint stripper on the rails also, and sand those down because I'm gonna restain those as well. But we'll do the full sanding on here first before we do that. So, all right, let's get to it. All right, so we're ready to get the table stained. So we're going to start on the bottom of the table. We're going to tack cloth it using a tack cloth, and that would get all the dust off and anything else that we don't want on the table. And then we're going to flip it over, or we'll stain it, and then we'll wipe it off after about 15 minutes. Flip the table over, and then we'll do the top side. And I'll show you a trick with that as far as setup, so we don't have the wet stain sitting on anything. So let's get started. So we got Minwax stain. This is going to be a gun stock, and this should match the original color. So we're going to kind of bring it back to the original color. I like to use foam brushes instead of rags. Keeps your hands cleaner, and it gives you the same outcome. So, and they're pretty cheap. I buy them in bulk, so the price is pretty low, because I'm either going to use them painting, or I'm going to use them staining or polying or something. So it's worth getting a bunch. I'm going to use them at some point. So. And then once we put this coat down, I'll wipe it off with a clean rag, and then we'll flip it over. And I got the garage door open, and I got a fan going here too, so I don't pass out from the fumes. We don't need that. And this being hardwood, it should take the stain pretty evenly. If this was a soft wood like pine, I'd probably put a wood conditioner down, which I typically do when staining, but being that it's oak and that it had previously had stain on it, I'm not going to bother. It should take it pretty evenly. If it was a soft wood and you didn't put conditioner down, it can have a tendency to be splotchy. It'll give you dark patches and light patches depending on where the grain is and stuff, so it doesn't look good. So, but hardwood's usually pretty good. You don't usually have to do it. This looks like it's going to be red oak, either all red oak or some white oak mixed in, but it's all oak. And usually you can tell if it's soaking it in quite a bit. You'll see a lot of bubbles on the surface. I mean, a lot of these ones that are on there right when I brush is just me dunking it into the can. But over here, there's not a lot of bubbles. So it's not like really soaking in a ton, which is fine. It's oak, so I'm not expecting it to, but that's good. Also, it's not gonna, it's not gonna be uneven. It's pretty much all uniformly taking it. So, all right, so that's that. We'll let it sit for about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll wipe off any excess we got. Alright, so it's been about 15-20 minutes. So we're going to take clean lint-free cloth here and then wipe off all the excess. Alright, so stain excess is wiped off. Looks really good, really even, no splotchiness, and this is the underside, so you won't even see this, but it looks really good. So we'll flip this over and I'm going to set it. I'll show you what I used. I just used some scrap pieces of lumber, tacked in some finish nails, and we'll set it on that. So you really just have four, because I got two pieces, four little spots, and it won't mark up the finish, and it'll be on the underside anyway, so you won't see it. So let's get this flipped over and we'll stain the top. Alright, so we'll go through the same process, tack cloth, and then lay the stain down. You brush it on good, make sure we get in all the cracks on the 3/8 round on the edge too. We don't want to miss anything there. So it's kind of hard to tell by the camera, but you can also see here, you can see the spots where it's soaking in. So going over that, back over that area in about 5 minutes is probably a good idea, just to make sure you get the most amount of stain into the wood. Really, you kind of want to let it soak in until it can't take anymore. So that looks like it can take a little bit more over there. So we'll finish up the top here and then go back to that. Alright, that looks good. And I'll go ahead and stain those long side supports. And that's the same process as doing the top, so we won't film that. But same deal, tack cloth it, stain, and then wipe off the excess. Alright, so we'll wipe down the tabletop and the two rails, and then we'll let this sit overnight, and hopefully by tomorrow night it'll be ready for some polyurethane. So let's get this wiped down and see what it looks like. Looks pretty good. You always want to wipe with the grain. It will leave streaks if you go against the grain. And you don't want that, especially this far into the project. This is where you want the finish to look perfect. So if you leave a tiny streak in there, it's going to dry, and then it'll be back to sanding it back down again, and we don't want to do that. So there's a little bit of stain kind of in this little edge here that isn't really coming off wiping. So I'll kind of wipe the excess first, and I'll go back with a rag on like a scraper blade just to get into that little crevice, just so it's not gooped up there. because you'll see that when you go to do the polyurethane, or it won't be dry when you go to do the polyurethane, because there will be so much excess in that little space. So get another clean rag. That looks really good. Alright, let me get a scraper and I'll show you what I need. So we'll take the scraper blade and put it in and get it like that. And I'll kind of just run it along this edge to soak up the extra stain that's in there. Not really scraping anything off. It's just a little bit of extra in there that we want to get out. And that's kind of, that sort of thing is kind of what, you know, really matters. I think, you know, it's attention to that kind of detail, because if you leave that, it's just going to look all gummy and, you know, it's just sloppy, I think. And it's an easy thing to do, so might as well do it. So I'll double check it, make sure everything looks alright. No drips underneath. Alright, I'm happy with that. And I'll wipe off those rails and then let it sit overnight. Alright, so that was the first coat of polyurethane down. And it's going to be a satin finish. So the can of finish and the satin has some wax in it. And that's what gives it that kind of dull finish. So you definitely want to make sure you're mixing it well, because if you don't, that wax will actually settle to the bottom, and when you dip your brush in and put your finish on, it'll look okay when it's wet, but it'll never really fully dry. And it'll take days and days and days, and it'll like be gummy. So I don't usually get a small can, but I don't really have anything coming up that needs the satin just yet, so I just got a small can. So I usually mix it once for a project like this, put it on, and I'm fine. If I'm using a bigger can, like a gallon can, for a larger size project, I'll mix it, put some on, and I continually mix it, because over the course of putting the finish on, it will have a tendency to settle, so it won't look even. So you definitely want to keep it stirred with a satin finish, because it has the wax in it. So we're going to scuff this up, just a hand scuff with a 220 pad. You don't want to do it on a sander. Just do it by hand, just to scuff it up and hit any little high spots down, and get it scuffed for the next coat. So we're going to hand sand this and the two rails over there, and then we'll get started on our second coat. So. And it'll look white and chalky or dusty. That's okay. We're going to go back through with a tack cloth and tack off all that dust before we put our next coat on. And those scratches will disappear once we put our next coat down. And really, you can do as many coats as you want. I mean, it gets to the point where, especially with satin, it just doesn't do anything anymore. There's no point in going past maybe 3 coats, 4 coats. You're not really adding anything to the finish. So I usually do about 3 coats, or, you know, unless it doesn't look right at 3, and then I'll sand it and then do another coat. But usually 3 is usually kind of the tops I do on mine. And you definitely want to do the same amount of finish on the underside as you do on the top side. Keep it even, because then if you don't do that, it'll have a tendency to let in moisture on the lighter side, and it can warp the piece. So it's always good to do even amounts on both sides, or all sides. Same with the sides, scuff the sides real light, nothing crazy. I'm not sanding off the finish here, I'm just knocking down any little tiny air bubbles that may have came up. That's it. I'll run the tack cloth over it. And the smoother you put the finish on from the beginning, the better it's going to look at the end. You know, I didn't have to sand off any imperfections or anything here. So we'll sand and do the tack cloth on the rails, and then we'll do our second coat. Alright, so we got that all sanded down. I already mixed the polyurethane up, so that's all pre-mixed, ready to go, because it had been sitting since last night when we did the first coat. So we got it all mixed up, so that's ready, and we'll put our second coat down here. Alright, so typically on a bigger table like this, I'll just get my coat on, get everything covered, and then I'll do, even though the finish claims that it won't leave any brush strokes, you will kind of leave overlapping marks just from going back and forth. So I'll typically go with the grain and do a full pass on, you know, each section over the whole table, just to make sure everything's even, because it will dry thicker in some spots if you don't. So yes, it won't leave brush marks, especially if you're using a foam brush like this, but it will leave overlapping marks, thicker spots here and there. Alright, looks good. I'll do the rails next and let that dry overnight. Alright, so the finish for the top is done. We got our 3 coats of poly on there. Came out really nice. So it's got, you know, the satin sheen on it, not super glossy. Looks just like the old table did. Came out really nice. So we're going to go ahead and flip this over and do our final 3 coats on the underside. So let's get to that. So sometimes when you're polyurethane the top, and once you flip it over, you'll find you may have like little drips underneath the edge here. Before I start the first coat of polyurethane on here, I'll typically go around with like a little straight razor and just kind of shave them down, just so I'm starting with a nice flat surface. It's the underside most people won't notice, but if you're standing at the table like this, people have a tendency to run their hand underneath the table, and you don't want to feel those bumps. I like it nice and smooth. So to do that, we'll just, like I said, take a straight razor and just double check the edge. I got one here and maybe a little over there and a little one over there. So we'll go down and just take the straight real gently, just kind of shave it off, and it leaves just a little skin. So just a real light, so you're not scraping up the stain, just that little bump there. That's all it takes, just a little bit of scraping, and it just knocks it down. So once you, because if you leave anything on there, once you put the 3 coats of polyurethane on, it just builds up. It doesn't hide it. It just compounds through the poly. So we want to start with a flat, smooth finish. That way, that's what we have at the end. So we'll take these off, and then we'll do our first coat. All right, that feels good. So let's start our first coat. All right, so same rules apply to the underside that we did on the top side. All right, so there's the last coat. And like I said, we'll let that dry overnight, and then we can begin putting the side aprons back on and the center rails. And then this project will be complete. So let's let it dry, and we'll get back to it tomorrow. All right, so tabletop's all set. Well, the finish on the tabletop's all set. We gotta attach these center rails and then the perimeter rail here. So we're gonna use some 1¼ inch hardwood screws because this is oak, and that should wrap it up. So let's get that screwed down. I'm not gluing these down. The original ones weren't. They're not really there for support as far as the top goes. So it's, and the edge is just decorative. So I'm omitting the glue, and that way if the customer wants to glue them down, they can take these off, re-glue them if they want. Or if they need a little bit of adjustment, once the pedestal base goes in, they can do that. So that's why we're omitting the glue. And the reveal's the same all around. So that's good, feels good. Nice and sturdy. So let's flip it over and we can see the top and call it a wrap here. All right, top looks great. Looks really nice. The stain, we didn't, if you remember, we didn't stain, I didn't refinish the circular aprons. I ended up waiting to see how this color turned out, to see how it matched the aprons, and that would have saved us some time, so, and some money for the customer. And it turned out they matched perfectly, so we didn't do that, and I'll show you that. I'll get a little closer look here, but looks good. I'm happy with it, and I think the customer will be too. So let's take a closer look, and you can kind of see the profile of the apron. So this is the apron on there. And it's a two-piece, and it's got the little molding here, so that's nice. So that matched out well. It's darker than kind of what the camera is showing. It's not as a big difference, but it's just the lighting. Okay, so that's complete. So we'll send that back off to the customer and on to the next project. Thanks for watching.